Sir, we've got bogies on the long-range scanners. 12 vessels, unknown configuration, and they're not running away screaming, which is honestly a first. Captain Dylan Cross looked up from his coffee. Real coffee, not that synthetic swill they served on the smaller ships, and raised an eyebrow at his tactical officer. Come again, Lieutenant? The aliens, sir. They're not immediately fleeing in terror upon detecting our approach. It's unusual. Cross leaned back in his command chair aboard the UES Consequence, humanity's newest and arguably most obnoxiously oversized Titan-class warship. At 3 kilometers long and bristling with enough firepower to crack a small moon in half, she was what military engineers lovingly called a diplomatic statement with engines. Huh, Cross mused, taking another sip of his coffee. How refreshingly stupid of them. You see, in the grand tradition of human engineering, the Consequence wasn't just big. She was aggressively big, the kind of big that made other species question their life choices. The kind of big that suggested humanity had looked at the concept of overkill and decided it needed a promotion. The bridge itself was a monument to human excess. Holographic displays that could show you the molecular structure of a distant planet's atmosphere. Chairs that cost more than most species' annual military budgets, and coffee machines that could probably double as nuclear reactors in a pinch. Lieutenant Kowalski, Cross said, addressing his communications officer. Open a channel. Let's see what these brave little souls want. Channel open, sir. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing what could only be described as a floating collection of anxiety attacks in spaceship form. 12 vessels that looked like they'd been designed by committee. A very nervous committee that had never agreed on anything except that more tentacles probably meant better steering. The lead ship's captain appeared on screen, and Cross had to admire the creature's, let's call it, unique aesthetic. Imagine if a squid had gotten into a heated argument with a praying mantis about interior decorating, and somehow they'd both lost. The alien's skin shifted between colors like a mood ring having an existential crisis. Greetings, massive and terrifying vessel of unknown origin, the alien captain began, its voice carrying the distinctive warble of universal translators working overtime. I am Fleet Commander Zixith of the Galactic Harmonious Collective of Peaceful Commerce and definitely not military expansion. We come in peace? Cross couldn't help but grin. The question mark at the end was audible. Well, Fleet Commander Zixith, and can I just say, your parents really went all in on that name. I'm Captain Dylan Cross of the United Earth ship Consequence. We also come in peace. Heavily armed, unnecessarily large peace, but peace nonetheless. The alien's color shifted to what Cross could only assume was relief mixed with continued terror. It was like watching a rainbow having a panic attack. That is most reassuring, Captain Cross. Your vessel is quite impressive. Our scanners indicate it possesses enough firepower to sterilize several star systems. This is normal for your species' diplomatic vessels? Cross glanced around his bridge at his crew, all of whom were trying very hard not to smirk. Oh, this old thing? He said, gesturing vaguely at the tactical displays showing enough ordnance to make a supernova jealous. This is actually one of our smaller diplomatic ships. We call her a light cruiser. This was, of course, a complete lie. The Consequence was humanity's largest warship, a testament to the species' fundamental belief that if something was worth doing, it was worth doing with unnecessary amounts of violence potential. But Cross had learned that first contact went much smoother when you understated your capabilities rather than leading with, "Hello, we're humans, and we've weaponized mathematics." Commander Zixith's color shifted to what Cross was beginning to recognize as existential dread. Light cruiser. I see. And your larger vessels? Oh, you don't want to know about those, Cross said cheerfully. Let's just say we have ships that are bigger and leave it at that. Now what brings you to this charming little corner of space? The truth was, humanity didn't actually have bigger ships. The Consequence was the biggest thing they'd ever built, a monument to human engineering hubris that had consumed the GDP of 3 star systems and required its own zip code. But the aliens didn't need to know that. We are a peaceful trading fleet, Zixith said, the words coming out like someone confessing to a crime they weren't sure they'd committed. We were investigating reports of a new species in this region. A species that our long-range scouts described as unnaturally violent and possibly insane. Ah, Cross nodded sagely. You met the Stevens. The Stevens? Exploration ship. Good people, but they have this unfortunate habit of solving diplomatic problems with explosives. Very embarrassing for the rest of us. We've been meaning to have a talk with them about their methods. This was also largely untrue. The UES Stevens was actually quite well regarded for their diplomatic skills. It's just that their idea of diplomacy involved making very clear what would happen if diplomacy failed, usually through interpretive weapons demonstrations. I see, Zixith said, looking like someone who was beginning to understand they'd bitten off more than they could chew. And you represent the diplomatic arm of your species? Cross spread his hands in what he hoped was a disarming gesture. That's us. Hearts and minds, that's our motto. Of course, we also have the firepower to vaporize hearts and minds if necessary, but we prefer the peaceful approach. Lieutenant Kowalski leaned over to whisper in Cross's ear. Sir, our passive scanners are picking up some interesting readings from their ships. They're armed, but their weapons are, well, they're adorable. Cross nodded solemnly. This was often the case with first contact. Humanity had this unfortunate tendency to show up to diplomatic meetings with the equivalent of nuclear bazookas, while everyone else brought harsh language and stern looks. It wasn't that humans were particularly violent. Well, okay, they were, but that wasn't the point. The point was that humans had this deeply ingrained belief that peace was a wonderful thing that was best maintained through overwhelming superiority of firepower. It was like carrying a big stick, except the stick was 3 kilometers long and could glass continents. Commander Zixith, Cross said, settling back in his chair, why don't you tell me about this Galactic Harmonious Collective of yours? It sounds like a delightfully friendly organization. The aliens' colors shifted again, this time to what Cross was learning to recognize as embarrassment. Well, we are a collective of species dedicated to peaceful trade and mutual prosperity. We maintain small defense fleets for protection against pirates and other unsavory elements. How refreshingly honest, Cross said. And by small defense fleets, you mean we have some guns, but nothing that could actually hurt anyone who really meant business. That is a surprisingly accurate assessment, Captain Cross. Cross grinned. He was starting to like this Zixith character. There was something refreshing about dealing with someone who was honest about being outgunned rather than trying to bluff their way through it. Well, Commander, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that humanity is generally interested in peaceful trade and mutual prosperity. We like making friends, and we especially like making friends who can introduce us to new markets and technologies. Zixeth's colors brightened noticeably. And the bad news? The bad news is that we're also very, very good at making enemies disappear when they threaten our friends. It's a character flaw we're working on. I see. This is good to know. Cross stood up and walked over to the main view screen, his hands clasped behind his back in what he hoped was a thoughtful pose. In reality, he was trying very hard not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, captain of humanity's most powerful warship, trying to make friends with what appeared to be a collection of space-going nervous wrecks, who looked like they'd apologize for existing if given the chance. Tell me, Commander, what do you know about human psychology? Very little, I'm afraid. Our briefings mentioned that your species was unpredictable, violent, and fond of solving problems with excessive force. All true. Cross nodded. But there's something else you should know about humans. We're pack animals. We form groups, we protect those groups, and we get very upset when people threaten our groups. The thing is, we're also very good at adopting new members into our pack. He turned back to face the screen, where Zixith was watching him with what Cross could only assume was intense interest mixed with mild terror. What I'm saying, Commander, is that humanity is always looking for new friends, and we're very, very good friends to have. And if one chooses not to be friends with humanity? Cross shrugged. Well, that's their choice to make. We respect free will. Of course, we also respect the right to defend ourselves and our allies when threatened. But that's really a separate issue entirely. The bridge crew was doing an admirable job of maintaining their composure, but Cross could see the slight smiles on their faces. They knew exactly what he was doing, the classic human diplomatic approach of speaking softly while making absolutely sure everyone could see the enormous stick you were carrying. I think, Zixith said slowly, that the Galactic Harmonious Collective would be very interested in establishing diplomatic relations with humanity. Excellent! Cross clapped his hands together. I knew you were a reasonable being, Commander. Now, shall we discuss the details? I suggest we start with a cultural exchange program. You can show us your technology, your art, your philosophy, and we can show you ours. That sounds acceptable. What sort of cultural exchange did you have in mind? Cross walked back to his command chair, settling in with the air of someone who was thoroughly enjoying himself. Oh, the usual things. Trade delegations, academic exchanges, joint scientific ventures. Maybe some military cooperation exercises, just to make sure we're all on the same page about mutual defense. Military cooperation exercises? Nothing too dramatic, Cross said airily. Just some joint maneuvers, shared intelligence, that sort of thing. Really more of a trust-building exercise than anything else. What he didn't mention was that human military cooperation exercises tended to involve demonstrations of firepower that left participating species with a healthy respect for human friendship and a deep-seated terror of human enmity. It was remarkably effective at building lasting diplomatic relationships. Lieutenant Kowalski leaned over again. "Sir, we're receiving a priority message from Fleet Command." Cross nodded. "Put it through to my private channel." He touched his earpiece and listened for a moment, his expression growing slightly more serious. "Commander Zixith, I'm afraid I have some news that might interest you." "Yes?" "We've just received word from our intelligence division. It seems there's been some pirate activity in this sector recently. Several trade convoys have gone missing, and there are reports of a fairly large raider fleet operating in the area." Zixith's colors immediately shifted to what Cross was now certain was alarm. "Pirates, in this sector? Our own intelligence networks haven't detected any such activity." "That's not surprising," Cross said gently. "These particular pirates are apparently quite sophisticated. They use stealth technology and advanced tactics, the sort of thing that requires significant resources and organization." This was true, though Cross didn't mention that human intelligence had identified the pirate fleet largely because human sensors were designed by a species obsessed with finding things that didn't want to be found. When you came from a planet where everything was constantly trying to kill you, you got very good at spotting threats. This is very concerning," Zixith said. "Our trade routes pass through this sector regularly, if there are pirates operating here." "Well," Cross said, leaning forward slightly, "it just so happens that the Consequence is on a patrol mission in this area. We'd be happy to provide some additional security for your trade routes while we're here." That is most generous of you, Captain Cross. But surely a single ship, even one as impressive as yours, couldn't provide security for an entire sector." Cross smiled. It was the kind of smile that suggested he knew something Zixith didn't. "Commander, would you like to see a demonstration of why we call this a light cruiser?" Before Zixith could answer, Cross nodded to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Morrison, bring us to yellow alert. Activate the sensor array and start a full-spectrum scan of the surrounding area." The bridge lighting shifted slightly, and the hum of the ship's systems deepened as the Consequence came fully online. On the view screen, Zixith's colors shifted to something that might have been awe mixed with abject terror. "Captain," Lieutenant Morrison announced, "sensors are detecting 17 targets at extreme range. Configuration suggests raider vessels, moving in attack formation toward a merchant convoy approximately 2 light hours from our current position." Cross nodded calmly. "Time to intercept?" "At current speed, 47 minutes, sir." "And at flank speed?" 14 minutes, sir." Cross turned back to the view screen. "Commander Zixith, would you and your fleet like to observe a practical demonstration of human defensive capabilities?" Yes, I believe that would be educational." "Excellent. Lieutenant Morrison, take us to flank speed. Plot an intercept course for those raiders. And Morrison?" "Yes, sir?" "Set condition red. This is not a drill." The transformation of the Consequence from a large, imposing warship to a fully operational instrument of controlled violence was something to behold. The ship's massive engines howled to life, pushing the 3-kilometer behemoth through space at speeds that defied several laws of physics and at least one law of common sense. Cross watched the tactical display as they closed the distance to the pirate fleet. 17 ships, all heavily armed, all moving in perfect formation toward what appeared to be a convoy of merchant vessels. Professional pirates, then, not the usual collection of desperate criminals and failed entrepreneurs that usually plague trade routes. "Sir," Morrison announced, "we're within weapons range of the raider fleet." "Excellent. Open a channel to the lead raider ship." The view screen split to show both Zixith's concerned face and the bridge of the pirate vessel. The pirate captain was a member of a species Cross didn't recognize, something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a very angry accountant. "Unknown vessel," the pirate captain snarled. "You are interfering with a legitimate salvage operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Cross smiled pleasantly. "This is Captain Dylan Cross of the United Earthship Consequence. You are attacking merchant vessels in violation of approximately 17 different interstellar treaties. I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw peacefully." The pirate captain's laugh was the sound of someone who had clearly never met a human before. "One ship against 17, you're either insane or suicidal, human." "Actually," Cross said conversationally, "I'm just very, very good at math. Lieutenant Morrison?" "Target locked, sir." "Fire." What happened next was something that would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The Consequence didn't just fire her weapons, she expressed them. A focused beam of coherent energy that could have powered a small star system for a decade lanced out across space and touched the lead pirate vessel. The ship didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It simply ceased to exist, converted into its component atoms in a flash of light that was visible from several star systems away. 16 ships remaining, Morrison announced calmly. Cross turned back to the view screen, where the remaining pirate captain was staring in what Cross could only assume was shocked disbelief. As I was saying, you have one chance to withdraw peacefully. That was your demonstration shot. The pirate fleet's response was immediate and predictable. They opened fire with everything they had. Dozens of missiles, energy beams, and exotic weapons converged on the Consequence from multiple directions. They might as well have been throwing rocks at a mountain. The Consequence's defensive systems were a testament to human paranoia and engineering excellence. Energy shields that could stop a supernova, point defense systems that could target individual atoms, and armor that was technically classified as a war crime in several star systems. The pirate barrage struck the ship's defenses and simply stopped existing. Return fire, Cross said calmly. Full spread. The Consequence unleashed hell. When the light faded and the radiation cleared, there were no pirate ships left. There weren't even atoms that remembered being pirate ships. There was just empty space and the slowly expanding cloud of particles that had once been 17 vessels full of very surprised criminals. Cross turned back to the view screen, where Commander Zixith was staring at him with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering several major life choices. And that, Commander, is why we call this a light cruiser. Our actual warships are much less subtle. I see. That was quite impressive, Captain Cross. Thank you. We find that a good demonstration of capability tends to reduce misunderstandings in future negotiations. Cross sat back in his command chair, looking thoroughly satisfied with himself. In truth, the Consequence had just used about 0.03% of her total firepower to eliminate the pirate fleet. The ship was designed to fight entire star systems if necessary, not small groups of criminals with delusions of adequacy. Now then, Cross continued, where were we in our discussion about cultural exchange programs? Over the next several hours, Cross and Zixith worked out the details of humanity's first formal diplomatic relationship with an alien civilization. It was, by all accounts, a remarkably productive negotiation. The Galactic Harmonious Collective would provide humanity with access to their trade networks, star charts, and technology databases. In return, humanity would provide security services, advanced technology, and what Cross diplomatically termed conflict resolution assistance. What this actually meant was that humanity would protect the Collective's trade routes from pirates, hostile aliens, and various other threats, while the Collective would help humanity integrate into galactic civilization. It was, Cross reflected, exactly the sort of mutually beneficial arrangement that worked best when one party had overwhelmingly superior firepower and the wisdom to use it judiciously. There is one thing I'm curious about, Captain Cross, Zixith said as they were finalizing the agreements. Your species seems remarkably efficient at violence. Is this a recent development? Cross laughed. Oh no, Commander. We've been like this for millennia. It's just that until now we've only had each other to practice on. That is somewhat terrifying. Only if you're on the wrong side of it, Cross assured him. Humans make excellent friends and terrible enemies. The trick is making sure you're in the right category. And how does one ensure they remain in the friend category? Cross shrugged. Don't betray us. Don't threaten our allies. And don't try to conquer Earth. It's really quite simple. Those seem like reasonable requirements. We like to think so. As the Consequence prepared to escort Zixith's fleet to the nearest collective station, Cross found himself reflecting on the nature of first contact. In all the scenarios humanity had imagined, they'd always assumed they would be the weaker party, the ones who would need to prove themselves to more advanced alien civilizations. Instead, they'd arrived on the galactic scene like a heavily armed diplomatic sledgehammer, solving problems through the simple expedient of being too dangerous to ignore and too useful to antagonize. It wasn't the most elegant approach to interstellar relations, but it was undeniably effective. Sir, Lieutenant Kowalski announced, we're receiving a message from Fleet Command. They want a full report on first contact procedures. Cross grinned. Tell them it went smoothly. The aliens seem friendly, reasonable, and properly appreciative of human capabilities. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And the pirates, sir? What pirates? Cross asked innocently. I don't recall encountering any pirates. Just some debris that was cluttering up the space lanes. As the Consequence moved through space alongside her new alien allies, Cross couldn't help but feel optimistic about humanity's future among the stars. They'd made their first alien friends, established their first interstellar alliance, and demonstrated that human diplomacy was as effective as ever. The fact that their diplomacy was backed by enough firepower to crack planets in half was really just a happy coincidence. "Captain," Commander Zixith's voice crackled over the comm. "Our navigational computers are showing that we'll reach the nearest collective station in approximately 6 hours. I was wondering, would you and your crew be interested in a tour of our facilities? It would give us an opportunity to learn more about each other's cultures." Cross smiled. "That sounds like an excellent idea, Commander. We'd be delighted to accept your invitation." "Wonderful. I should probably mention that the station is home to representatives from several different species within the collective. You'll be meeting quite a diverse group." "Even better," Cross said. "We're always interested in meeting new species. The more friends we can make, the better. I should warn you, some of them may be intimidated by your vessel's capabilities." Cross laughed. "Don't worry about that, Commander. We'll be on our best behavior. We know how to be diplomatic." "That is reassuring, I think." 6 hours later, the UES Consequence docked at Harmony Station, a massive orbital facility that served as one of the collective's primary trade hubs. The station was an impressive feat of engineering, a sprawling collection of habitats, docking bays, and commercial districts that housed nearly 1 million beings from dozens of different species. It was also, Cross noted with professional interest, completely undefended. No weapons, no shields, no military presence whatsoever. It was the kind of target that would give human strategic planners nightmares and enemy commanders delusions of easy victory. "Interesting architecture," Cross commented as they approached the docking bay. "Very trusting." "The collective has always believed in peaceful coexistence," Zixith explained. "We've never seen the need for heavy military installations." "That's going to change," Cross said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" "Nothing important, Commander. Just thinking out loud." The docking process was surprisingly smooth, considering that the Consequence was roughly 10 times larger than anything the station had been designed to accommodate. The station's engineers had to reconfigure 3 entire docking complexes just to fit the human ship, but they managed it with remarkable efficiency. Cross assembled a small diplomatic team for the tour. Himself, Lieutenant Kowalski as his communications specialist, Lieutenant Morrison as his security chief, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist. They were armed, of course. Humans didn't go anywhere without being armed. But they kept their weapons concealed out of consideration for their host's sensibilities. The airlock cycled open, revealing a delegation of aliens that looked like someone had raided the universe's most exotic pet shop. There was Zixith, of course, along with what appeared to be a sentient tree, something that looked like a crystal formation with eyes, and a creature that defied description but seemed friendly enough. "Captain Cross," Zixith said, his color shifting to what Cross now recognized as pleased excitement. "Welcome to Harmony Station. Allow me to introduce my colleagues." The introductions went smoothly, though Cross had to admit that keeping track of all the names was challenging when half of them sounded like mathematical equations, and the other half like someone clearing their throat. Still, everyone seemed friendly, and more importantly, everyone seemed appropriately impressed by humanity's debut on the galactic stage. "Your vessel is quite remarkable," commented the sentient tree, whose name was apparently pronounced as a series of rustling sounds that Cross's translator rendered as whisper leaf. "Our engineers are fascinated by your propulsion systems." "Thank you," Cross replied. "We're always happy to share technology with our allies. Within reason, of course." The tour of the station was educational, if somewhat predictable. The collective had built a remarkable civilization based on cooperation, trade, and mutual respect. It was peaceful, prosperous, and completely unprepared for the harsh realities of a universe that didn't always value cooperation and mutual respect. "It's beautiful," Dr. Vasquez whispered to Cross as they walked through one of the station's gardens. "But it's also incredibly vulnerable." Cross nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. Harmony Station was a testament to what peaceful species could accomplish when they worked together, but it was also a target that practically begged to be attacked by anyone with more ambition than conscience. "Tell me, Commander Zixith," Cross said as they paused at an observation deck overlooking the station's main commercial district. "How do you handle security issues? Criminal activity, disputes between species, that sort of thing?" "We have a mediation council," Zixith explained. "When conflicts arise, all parties sit down together and discuss their differences until they reach a mutually acceptable solution. And if someone doesn't want to sit down and discuss their differences?" Zixith's colors shifted to something that might have been confusion. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't they want to resolve their differences peacefully?" Cross exchanged a look with his team. This was going to be a learning experience for everyone involved. Commander, Cross said gently, there are species in the universe that don't share your commitment to peaceful resolution of conflicts. Species that prefer to take what they want rather than negotiate for it. But that's not logical. Cooperation benefits everyone. Conflict only leads to suffering. You're absolutely right, Cross agreed. Unfortunately, not everyone in the universe is logical. This seemed to disturb Zixith greatly, his colors shifting through several different shades of what Cross was learning to recognize as deep concern. Are you saying there are species that actively seek conflict? Oh yes, Cross said. Lots of them. Pirates, raiders, conquering empires, fanatical cults, species that view violence as a form of recreation. The universe is full of beings who would see a place like this as nothing more than a target-rich environment. But how do you defend against such beings? Cross smiled. That's where species like humanity come in handy. Over the next few hours, Cross and his team provided their hosts with a crash course in the realities of interstellar politics. They explained concepts like deterrence, strategic defense, and the unfortunate necessity of being prepared to fight in order to maintain peace. The aliens listened with growing horror as Cross described some of the more aggressive species humanity had encountered in their explorations. The Krillian Empire, which conquered worlds for sport. The Devourers, who consumed entire civilizations. The Void Cultists, who believed that existence was a mistake that needed to be corrected. These species, they actually exist? Asked the crystal being, whose name was a harmonic frequency that the translator rendered as resonance. Oh yes, Cross confirmed. And they're all out there, looking for easy targets. The only reason they haven't found the collective yet is because you've been lucky. But surely the galactic community would band together to stop such aggressive species. Cross laughed, but not unkindly. Commander, there is no galactic community. There are just collections of species trying to survive in a universe that's actively hostile to organized life. Some of them, like the collective, do it through cooperation and trade. Others do it through conquest and intimidation. And a few, like humanity, do it through being too dangerous to mess with. This is a great deal to absorb, Zixith said, his colors cycling through what Cross was now certain was existential crisis. You're saying that our entire way of life is based on the assumption that other species are as reasonable as we are? Exactly, Cross nodded. And while that's a beautiful philosophy, it's also incredibly dangerous when you encounter species that aren't reasonable. So what do we do? Cross clapped Zixith on what he assumed was probably a shoulder. That's why you're lucky you met us first. Humanity specializes in dealing with unreasonable species. The rest of the tour was somewhat subdued, as the aliens absorbed the implications of what Cross had told them. Their peaceful, cooperative civilization was essentially defenseless against the sort of aggressive species that dominated much of the galaxy. They needed protection, and humanity was offering to provide it. It was, Cross reflected, a textbook example of how to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. The collective got security and protection from hostile species. Humanity got access to established trade networks, advanced technology, and a foothold in galactic civilization. Everyone won, except for the pirates and raiders who would no longer find the collective's space to be a safe hunting ground. Captain Cross, Zixith said as they returned to the docking bay where the consequence waited. I believe I speak for the entire collective when I say that we are very grateful for your offer of protection. Think nothing of it, Commander. That's what friends are for. I do have one question, though. What's that? You mentioned that your ship is considered a light cruiser by human standards. What exactly would you classify as a heavy warship? Cross grinned. This was always the fun part of first contact. Well, Commander, our heavy warships are designed to fight entire fleets. Our dreadnoughts are built to take on star systems. And our planet killers are exactly what they sound like. Though we only built a few of those, and we only use them in extreme circumstances. Zixith's colors went through what Cross could only describe as a rainbow of terror. You have ships that can destroy planets? Oh yes. Several, actually. We call them diplomatic solution providers. That is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard. Cross shrugged. It's all about context, Commander. In the hands of an aggressive, expansionist species, planet-killing weapons are instruments of terror and oppression. In the hands of a species that just wants to be left alone to drink coffee and explore the universe, they're peacekeeping tools. And which category does humanity fall into? Well, Cross said thoughtfully, we definitely want to be left alone to drink coffee and explore the universe. We also want our friends to be safe and happy. As for what happens to people who threaten us or our friends, Let's just say we believe in permanent solutions to persistent problems. As the diplomatic team prepared to return to the Consequence, Cross found himself genuinely optimistic about humanity's future in the galaxy. They'd made first contact with a peaceful, reasonable species that could help them navigate the complexities of interstellar civilization. They'd demonstrated their capabilities without having to actually hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. And they'd established the kind of reputation that would make future negotiations much easier. "Sir," Lieutenant Morrison said quietly as they walked toward the airlock, "the station's security chief wants to know if we'd be willing to provide some training for their personnel." Cross smiled. "Tell him we'd be delighted to help. A few basic courses in threat assessment, defensive tactics, and conflict resolution should do wonders for their confidence." "And by conflict resolution, you mean?" "Teaching them how to make problems go away permanently." "Understood, sir." As the Consequence prepared to depart Harmony Station, Cross settled back in his command chair and reflected on the day's events. First contact had gone better than anyone had dared to hope. Humanity had found allies, the aliens had found protectors, and somewhere in the galaxy, pirates and raiders were about to discover that the easy pickings they'd been enjoying were now heavily defended by a species that viewed conflict resolution as a form of performance art. "Set course for the outer rim, Lieutenant Morrison," Cross ordered. "Let's see what other neighbors we can meet." "Aye, sir. Course laid in." "And Morrison?" "Yes, sir." "Send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them that first contact was a complete success, and that humanity is officially open for business in the galactic community." "What about the pirates we encountered?" Cross smiled. "What pirates?" "I don't recall encountering any pirates. Just some space debris that was cluttering up the navigation lanes." As the UES Consequence moved away from Harmony Station and into the vast darkness of interstellar space, Cross couldn't help but feel that humanity had just taken its first step toward a very interesting future. They'd arrived in the galactic community like a diplomatic sledgehammer wrapped in a velvet glove, solving problems through the time-honored human tradition of being too dangerous to ignore and too useful to antagonize. It wasn't the most subtle approach to interstellar relations, but it was undeniably effective. And in a universe full of species that had forgotten that sometimes peace could only be maintained through superior firepower, humanity was about to provide a very educational reminder. After all, someone had to keep the galaxy safe for reasonable beings to live in, and if that someone happened to be a species of caffeinated primates with a talent for creative violence and an unhealthy obsession with building ridiculously oversized warships, well, that was just the universe's way of maintaining its sense of humor. "Sir," Lieutenant Kowalski announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Harmony Station." "Put it through." Commander Zixith appeared on the main view screen, his colors bright with what Cross now recognized as excitement. "Captain Cross, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done today. The Collective Council has voted unanimously to accept humanity's offer of alliance." "That's excellent news, Commander. We're looking forward to a long and profitable relationship. There is one more thing. The Council would like to invite humanity to send a permanent ambassador to Harmony Station, someone who can help coordinate our mutual defense efforts and serve as a liaison between our peoples." Cross nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very generous offer. I'll pass it along to Fleet Command, but I suspect they'll be very interested. Having a permanent diplomatic presence in collective space would be extremely valuable." "Wonderful. And Captain?" "Yes, Commander?" "When you do establish an embassy here, please make sure your ambassador understands our customs. We're a very peaceful people, and some of our more sensitive species might be intimidated by typical human diplomatic methods." Cross grinned. "Don't worry, Commander. We'll send someone who knows how to be diplomatic. Though I should mention that even our diplomats tend to be heavily armed. It's a cultural thing." "Of course it is," Zixith said, his colors shifting to what Cross was learning to recognize as resigned acceptance. "I'm beginning to understand that everything about humanity involves being heavily armed. Now you're getting it. Have a good day, Commander. And remember, if anyone gives you trouble, just mention that you're under human protection. That should solve most problems before they start. And if it doesn't, then call us, and we'll solve them permanently." The transmission ended, and Cross settled back in his chair with a satisfied smile. In the space of a single day, humanity had gone from being completely unknown in the galaxy to being the newest member of an interstellar alliance. Not bad for a species that had only figured out faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. "Sir," Lieutenant Morrison announced, "long-range sensors are detecting another ship formation. Distance, approximately 3 light hours, bearing 27 Mark 6. Configuration?" "Unknown, sir." The ships don't match any known collective designs, and they're significantly larger than Commander Zixith's vessels. Cross sat up straighter. How much larger? Each ship is approximately the size of a collective cruiser, sir. 12 ships total, moving in military formation. Interesting. Any response to our sensor sweeps? Negative, sir. They don't appear to have detected us yet. Cross considered this for a moment. 12 large ships in military formation, moving through space that was supposedly controlled by the collective. Either they were allies that Zixith had forgotten to mention, or they were exactly the sort of problem that humanity had just agreed to help solve. Lieutenant Kowalski, open a channel to Harmony Station. I want to speak with Commander Zixith immediately. Channel open, sir. Zixith appeared on the screen, his colors cycling through what Cross now recognized as mild confusion. Captain Cross, is there a problem? Possibly. We're detecting a formation of 12 large warships moving through this sector. Are they part of the collective fleet? Zixith's colors immediately shifted to alarm. 12 warships in this sector? That's impossible. The collective doesn't maintain any military vessels larger than escort frigates. Then I think we may have found another example of those unreasonable species I was telling you about. Oh dear. What do we do? Cross smiled. It was the kind of smile that suggested he was about to enjoy himself immensely. Commander, you're about to get your first practical demonstration of why it's useful to have humans as allies. Lieutenant Morrison, take us to battle stations. The Consequence transformed once again from an impressive diplomatic vessel to a fully operational instrument of controlled violence. Weapon systems came online, shields powered up, and the ship's massive engines prepared to deliver their payload of heavily armed diplomacy at maximum velocity. Sir, Morrison announced, the unknown vessels have changed course. They're moving toward Harmony Station. Of course they are, Cross muttered. It's always something. Lieutenant Kowalski, patch me through to the lead vessel of that formation. Channel open, sir. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of what was obviously a military vessel. The ship's captain was a member of a species Cross didn't recognize, something that looked like a cross between a shark and a very angry lawyer. Unknown vessel, the alien captain snarled. You are trespassing in space claimed by the hegemony of Craxus. Withdraw immediately, or be destroyed. Cross raised an eyebrow. This is Captain Dylan Cross of the United Earthship Consequence. This space is under the protection of the Galactic Harmonious Collective, and by extension, under the protection of humanity. You are the ones who are trespassing. The alien captain's laugh was the sound of someone who had clearly never heard of humans before. Humanity? Never heard of you. 1 ship against 12? You're either insane or suicidal. Cross sighed. You know, that's exactly what the last group of unreasonable aliens said to me. It didn't work out well for them either. Are you threatening us, human? Oh no, Cross said pleasantly. I'm making you an offer. You can withdraw peacefully and pretend this never happened, or you can find out why the collective considers humanity to be adequate protection against hostile aliens. The collective? The alien captain's expression shifted slightly. Those peaceful fools, they have no military capability whatsoever. You're absolutely right, Cross agreed. They don't, but they don't need one because they have us. The alien captain studied Cross for a long moment, clearly trying to assess the threat level of a single human ship. It was, Cross reflected, exactly the sort of tactical mistake that made first contact so entertaining. 12 ships against 1, the captain said finally. I like those odds. So did the pirates, Cross said conversationally, right up until they stopped existing. What pirates? Cross smiled. Exactly. The alien formation opened fire without further warning, 12 ships unleashing everything they had at the Consequence. It was an impressive display of firepower, the kind of coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed most vessels in the galaxy. The Consequence absorbed the attack like a mountain absorbing raindrops. Their weapons are more sophisticated than the pirates, Morrison announced calmly, but still well within acceptable parameters. Return fire, Cross ordered. Full spread, let's make this educational. What happened next was something that would be analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Consequence didn't just defeat the hegemony formation. She dismantled it with surgical precision, demonstrating the difference between weapons designed to hurt and weapons designed to end arguments permanently. The first salvo eliminated 6 ships outright, converting them into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The second salvo crippled 4 more, leaving them dead in space with their crews intact, but their weapon systems reduced to expensive scrap metal. The final 2 ships, apparently crewed by beings with more survival instinct than their captain, immediately began broadcasting surrender signals. Ceasefire, Cross ordered. Open a channel to the surviving vessels. The view screen showed the bridge of one of the damaged ships, where an alien who looked remarkably similar to the original captain was staring at Cross with an expression of pure, undiluted terror. This is Captain Cross of the UES Consequence. Are you prepared to discuss the terms of your withdrawal from collective space? Yes, the alien captain said immediately. Yes, we are very prepared to discuss withdrawal. Please don't destroy us. I'm not going to destroy you, Cross said reasonably. You're going to serve a much more useful purpose as witnesses. Witnesses? You're going to return to the hegemony of Craxus and explain to your leadership that the Galactic Harmonious Collective is now under human protection. You're going to tell them that any further incursions into collective space will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. And you're going to make sure they understand that humanity does not negotiate with aggressive species. And if the hegemony doesn't listen? Cross shrugged. Then we'll have to visit the hegemony homeworld to discuss the matter in person. I'm sure they'll find the conversation educational. The alien captain's skin tone shifted to what Cross could only assume was abject terror. We will deliver your message exactly as you have stated it. Excellent. Oh, and Captain? Yes? Make sure you mention that this was a light cruiser. We wouldn't want the hegemony to get the wrong impression about humanity's military capabilities. As the surviving hegemony vessels limped away to spread the word about humanity's impressive debut in galactic politics, Cross found himself reflecting on how remarkably well things were going. In the space of a single day, humanity had made first contact with a peaceful alien civilization, established their first interstellar alliance, and demonstrated to the galaxy's more aggressive species that the easy days were over. Sir, Lieutenant Kowalski announced, we're receiving congratulations from Harmony Station. Commander Zixith says the Collective Council is impressed beyond words with humanity's defensive capabilities. Tell them it was our pleasure, Cross said. That's what allies are for. There's more, sir. The Council is formally requesting that humanity establish a permanent military presence in collective space. They're offering to provide base facilities, resources, and full diplomatic immunity. Cross grinned. This was better than he'd dared hope. A permanent military base in collective space would give humanity a strategic foothold in the galaxy, and provide the collective with the kind of protection they desperately needed. Tell them we accept, with gratitude. And Lieutenant? Yes, sir? Send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're going to need more ships out here. Lots more ships. I have a feeling word is going to spread about humanity's involvement with the collective, and not everyone is going to be happy about it. How many more ships, sir? Cross considered this for a moment. The galaxy was a big place, full of aggressive species, territorial empires, and various other forms of organized trouble. Protecting the collective was going to require a significant commitment of resources. All of them, he said finally. We're going to need all of them. Over the following weeks, as the Consequence continued her patrol of collective space, Cross watched with satisfaction as humanity's reputation spread throughout the galaxy. Word of the incident with the hegemony forces traveled fast, as did stories about the mysterious human warship that could eliminate entire fleets without apparent effort. The effect on galactic politics was immediate and dramatic. Species that had been considering aggressive action against their neighbors suddenly discovered urgent domestic issues that required their full attention. Pirate fleets that had been terrorizing trade routes mysteriously found other employment. Even the most belligerent empires began reconsidering their expansion plans in light of the new strategic reality. Humanity had arrived in the galactic community, and the galaxy was rapidly learning to adjust. Sir, Lieutenant Morrison announced during one of their routine patrols, we're receiving a transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Foster sends her compliments and wants to know if you need any backup. Cross laughed. Tell the Admiral that everything is under control. The locals are friendly, the neighborhood is quiet, and I think we've established an excellent reputation for human diplomacy. And if she asks about our methods, tell her we're following standard first contact protocols. Speak softly, and carry a ridiculously oversized warship. As the UES Consequence continued her patrol through the peaceful space of the Galactic Harmonious Collective, Captain Dylan Cross reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Humanity had gone from being unknown in the galaxy to being one of its most influential species, all through the simple expedient of being too dangerous to ignore and too useful to antagonize. It wasn't the most traditional approach to diplomacy, but it was undeniably effective. And in a universe where peaceful species needed protection from those who weren't so peaceful, humanity had found its perfect role, the friendly neighborhood superpower, always ready to help solve problems through the application of overwhelming force and creative violence, After all, someone had to keep the galaxy safe for reasonable beings to live in. And if that someone happened to be a species of caffeinated primates with a talent for building impossibly large warships and an unhealthy obsession with making friends through superior firepower, well, that was just the universe's way of maintaining its sense of humor. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place, and humanity was just getting started. And that, class, is why the Vergozi Treaty of 3421 established the Galactic Classification System for planetary habitation zones. Professor Lyrics tapped his holographic pointer against the projection, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Now, moving on to today's practical demonstration. Wait, we're actually having a demonstration? The question came from somewhere in the back of the amphitheater. The rustling of data pads and the shifting of various appendages indicated a sudden spike in attention among the previously half-asleep xenobiology students. Professor Lyrics's mouth parts stretched into what passed for a smile on his species. Indeed, Trell, today is a special occasion. As you know, this advanced xenobiology course is one of the most prestigious in the Galactic University system. And today, he paused dramatically, we have the honor of hosting not 1 but 2 rare specimens. The class collectively leaned forward. Even Zavex, who typically spent the lectures in a state of semi-hibernation, perked up his sensory stalks. First, the professor continued, pressing a button on his console. We have a Class 3 predator from the Niskian moon system. A circular platform in the center of the room began to rise from the floor. On it stood a reinforced containment field, and within that, holy cosmic debris! Someone gasped. The creature inside the field was approximately the size of a standard cargo container, with gleaming obsidian scales and 6 limbs that ended in what could only be described as natural biological scythes. Its head was dominated by a maw lined with crystalline teeth, each as long as a Zarlaxian's arm. 4 yellow eyes tracked around the room with predatory precision. This, Professor Lyrics announced proudly, is a juvenile Niski razorclaw, one of the apex predators of its ecosystem and responsible for the extinction of 17 different species on its home moon. The containment field is, of course, rated at level 9 security, so there's absolutely no chance of... A loud crack interrupted him as one of the creature's limbs struck the energy barrier, causing it to flicker momentarily. Several students screamed. 1 fainted. 3 others instinctively engaged their species' respective defense mechanisms. 1 puffed up to twice his size. Another exuded a noxious cloud of green vapor, and a third simply disappeared, her adaptive camouflage rendering her invisible. Professor Lyrics continued, seemingly unperturbed. As I was saying, there's no chance of any danger. Now the Razorclaw is from a Class 3 death world, which means gravity approximately 1.2 standard units, atmospheric pressure of 1.4, and temperature fluctuations between 260 and 310 Kelvin. Quite uncomfortable for most of us, I'm sure you'll agree. The class murmured in agreement, their eyes still fixed on the predator, which had begun systematically testing the containment field for weaknesses. But, the professor raised a limb for emphasis, that's nothing compared to our second guest. He pressed another button, and a second platform began to rise beside the first. May I present a genuine Class 5 Deathworlder? The tension in the room was palpable. Class 5 worlds were the stuff of nightmares. Planets so hostile that they were considered virtually uninhabitable by civilized standards. The gravitational forces alone would crush most species, not to mention the toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and lethal radiation levels. The second containment field materialized, and within it stood, well, it was rather anticlimactic. The creature was bipedal, covered in some kind of artificial fabric rather than natural armor, with a bizarrely flat face dominated by forward-facing eyes and a small, unimpressive mouth. It had only 2 arms, ending in what appeared to be manipulator digits rather than proper weapons. It stood there, seemingly relaxed, hands in the pockets of its lower coverings, looking around the classroom with apparent interest. This, Professor Lyrics announced with a flourish, is a human from the planet Earth. Class 5 Deathworld, the most extreme environment ever to produce a spacefaring civilization. The class stared at the human, then at the Razorclaw, then back at the human again. The comparison was, frankly, laughable. Professor? A student with membranous wings raised an appendage. Are you sure you didn't mix up the specimens? The Razorclaw looks much more impressive. An excellent observation, Nexel. Professor Lyrics chuckled, his mandibles vibrating with amusement. And precisely the point of today's demonstration. Appearances can be deceiving, especially in xenobiology. Inside the second containment field, the human raised a hand. Hi there, I'm Daniel. Nice to meet you all. His voice was transmitted through the field's communication system, sounding oddly casual for a being from a planet that should, by all rights, have produced only monsters. The class stared in collective bewilderment. Now, Professor Lyrics continued, for the educational portion of our demonstration, we will be observing predatory responses to stimuli. Don't worry, both specimens have been well fed and are here voluntarily. Mostly voluntarily, the human, Daniel, quipped. The university is giving me course credits for this, so... He shrugged. Wait! Zavex's voice rose from the middle of the classroom, his translator struggling to convey his incredulity. The human is a student here? At Galactic University? Indeed, Professor Lyrics confirmed. Mr. Daniel is studying comparative galactic literature with a minor in interspecies diplomacy. He's one of 17 humans currently enrolled. This revelation caused another wave of murmurs. The idea that Deathworlders could be walking among them, sitting in the same cafeterias, using the same facilities, it was almost unthinkable. Now, to begin our demonstration. The professor activated a small hovering drone that flew into the Razorclaw's containment field. The drone projected a holographic image of what appeared to be the Razorclaw's natural prey, a six-legged herbivore with a thick protective shell. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Razorclaw let out a screech that made several students recoil despite the soundproofing of the containment field. It launched itself at the hologram with shocking speed, all 6 of its blade limbs extended for the kill. When it passed through the hologram, its rage seemed to intensify, and it began systematically attacking the drone itself, which nimbly evaded its strikes. Classic predatory response, Professor Lyrics narrated. Note the immediate target acquisition, the commitment to the attack, and the persistence even after the initial strike fails. This is characteristic of apex predators from resource-scarce environments where each successful hunt is critical to survival. The drone retreated, and the Razorclaw continued to pace its enclosure, its yellow eyes still tracking the device warily. Now let's observe our Class 5 Deathworlders' response to a similar stimulus. The drone flew into Daniel's containment field and projected the same holographic prey animal. The human looked at it with mild interest, then glanced back at the professor. Am I supposed to do something with this? He asked. The class erupted in confused chatter. Oh my stars, is it defective? Maybe humans aren't predators after all. Perhaps it's just more intelligent and recognizes it's not real. Professor Lyrics raised his limbs for silence. An excellent learning moment, mister. Daniel, humans are omnivores with predatory ancestry, correct? Yeah, that's right, Daniel confirmed. Then perhaps we need a more appropriate stimulus. The professor adjusted something on his control panel, and the drone's hologram changed to display what appeared to be some kind of small, furry creature scurrying across the floor of the containment field. Daniel watched it with slightly more interest but made no move to attack. Still nothing, Professor Lyrics mused. Fascinating, let's try one more. The hologram changed again, this time showing what appeared to be a wrapped package labeled chocolate in Galactic Standard. Daniel's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and he moved, not with the explosive violence of the Razorclaw, but with a casual, controlled gait that somehow covered the distance to the drone with surprising efficiency. He reached out and passed his hand through the hologram, then chuckled. Nice try, Professor. I know chocolate when I see it, and that's just a picture. Remarkable restraint, Professor Lyrics exclaimed, turning to address the class. This highlights a key difference between predatory species from different planetary classifications. The Razorclaw, evolving on a Class 3 world, relies on immediate all-out aggression to secure resources. The human, from a far more hostile Class 5 environment, has developed precision, patience, and the ability to conserve energy. Crucial adaptations when living in a gravity well nearly twice what most of us would consider tolerable. A student with a gelatinous body raised a pseudopod. But Professor, if humans are so well adapted to extreme conditions, why don't they look more dangerous? An excellent question, Bloopy, Professor Lyrics replied. Mr. Daniel, would you care to address this? Daniel shrugged. We don't need to look dangerous. Earth has plenty of animals with big teeth, claws, venom, you name it. But we're still the apex predators because of these. He tapped his temple. And these. He wiggled his fingers. Precisely. Professor Lyrics's voice took on the enthusiastic tone of an educator in his element. Humans represent an evolutionary path where intelligence, tool use, and endurance became more advantageous than physical weaponry. Now, for the most instructive part of our demonstration. The professor pressed a sequence of buttons on his console. With Mr. Daniel's prior consent, of course, we're going to introduce a controlled threat stimulus to observe defensive responses. The containment field around the razor claw emitted a mild electric shock. The creature reacted instantly, hissing and striking at the invisible barrier with renewed fury. Its scales bristled, revealing rows of secondary defensive spines that glowed with bioluminescent warning colors. Classic threat display, Professor Lyrics noted. Designed to intimidate potential attackers. Effective against most predators in its native ecosystem. He then activated the stimulus for Daniel's containment field. A similar mild shock was applied. Daniel flinched slightly, then frowned. "Hey, that one was stronger than you said it would be," he called out. "Apologies," Professor Lyrics responded, though the set of his mandibles suggested this might have been intentional. "Now, class, observe that the human's immediate response is vocal communication rather than physical display. This is characteristic of social predators who—" A sudden commotion from the razor claw's containment field interrupted him. The creature had begun hurling itself against the energy barrier with increasing force. With each impact, the field's luminosity fluctuated more dramatically. "Professor!" One of the students pointed in alarm. "The field integrity is dropping." Professor Lyrics checked his console, his previously confident demeanor faltering. "That's not supposed to happen. The field should automatically compensate for—" A loud crack echoed through the amphitheater as one of the razor claw's limbs penetrated partially through the weakened barrier. Alarms began to sound, and red emergency lights flashed throughout the room. "Remain calm," Professor Lyrics called out, though his own voice had risen several octaves. "The secondary containment protocols will—" Another violent impact, and the energy field collapsed entirely. The razor claw let out a triumphant shriek that sent most of the class scrambling toward the exits. Professor Lyrics frantically pressed buttons on his console, but the backup systems seemed to be malfunctioning as well. "Evacuate the classroom," he shouted. "Security protocols are failing. This is not part of the demonstration." In the chaos, few noticed what was happening in the second containment field. Daniel had stepped forward, his posture suddenly different, more alert, more focused. He tapped a control on the inside of his field. "Professor, drop my containment too," he called out. "What?" "No! You must evacuate with the others!" Professor Lyrics was backing away from his console as the razor claw leaped from its platform and began advancing toward him, its yellow eyes fixed on what it apparently perceived as the controlling entity in the room. "Professor, that thing is going to kill you in about 3 seconds if you don't drop my field," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm amid the pandemonium. Whether it was panic or a moment of trust, Professor Lyrics slapped a large emergency release button before turning to flee. The energy field around Daniel dissipated just as the razor claw launched itself toward the retreating professor. What happened next occurred so quickly that those students who hadn't yet escaped would later debate exactly what they'd witnessed. Daniel moved. Not with the frantic speed of prey fleeing a predator, but with the measured, efficient motion of something accustomed to operating in a gravity well nearly twice what the razor claw had evolved in. He intercepted the creature in mid-leap, ducking under its scything limbs and positioning himself between it and the professor. The razor claw, momentarily surprised by this new obstacle, redirected its attack toward Daniel. 6 razor-sharp limbs lashed out simultaneously in what should have been an unavoidable death sentence. But Daniel wasn't where the attacks landed. He had shifted his position with a precision that seemed physically impossible, allowing the deadly appendages to slice through empty air. In the same motion, he reached out and grasped one of the creature's limbs near a joint, applying leverage in a way that caused the razor claw to lose balance. "The thing about being from a Class 5 death world," Daniel called out conversationally, as if he weren't in the middle of a life-or-death struggle, "is that you get really good at calculating physics on the fly." The razor claw recovered quickly, spinning to face Daniel with a hiss that displayed rows of its crystalline teeth. It was clearly reassessing this unexpected threat, its predatory instincts recalibrating. "Also," Daniel continued, circling to maintain distance, "when you grow up in 1.9 standard gravity, you develop about 3 times the muscle density of most species. Comes in handy sometimes." The razor claw charged again, this time employing a different attack pattern. Instead of going for a direct strike, it feinted to one side before slashing from another angle. Daniel dropped and rolled, a movement that looked almost leisurely compared to the razor claw's frenetic speed, yet somehow resulted in him being exactly where he needed to be. As he came up, he grabbed a piece of broken equipment from the floor and hurled it with startling precision. The projectile struck one of the razor claw's eyes, causing it to screech in pain and momentarily back away. "And that," Daniel added, "is what you get from evolving on a planet where throwing things accurately became an evolutionary advantage. We turned it into sports, actually. Baseball, javelin, basketball." The remaining students watched in astonishment as the human continued to evade the increasingly frustrated predator. It wasn't just that he was surviving. He was controlling the engagement, keeping the Razor Claw's attention fixed on him and away from the cowering professor and students. "University security will be here in approximately 90 seconds, Daniel called out, checking a device on his wrist while simultaneously sidestepping another attack. "Everyone should continue evacuating. Professor, is there anything that might calm this thing down? Any weaknesses?" Professor Lyrics, who had taken refuge behind an overturned desk, called back in a shaky voice. "Niski Razor Claws are sensitive to ultraviolet light. It simulates their sun's radiation storms, which drive them to seek shelter." "Great," Daniel muttered. "Anyone got a UV light handy? No? Figures." The Razor Claw, perhaps sensing that its prey was distracted, launched a coordinated attack with all 6 limbs, creating a virtual cage of slashing blades. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed that Daniel had finally miscalculated. Then, in a move that defied the intuitive physics of everyone watching, he drove himself forward, rather than backward, slipping into the narrow gap between 2 of the creature's limbs before they could close. The maneuver placed him directly under the Razor Claw's armored body. "This is probably gonna hurt," he grunted, before driving both fists upward into what appeared to be a vulnerable joint in the creature's underside. The Razor Claw emitted a shriek unlike anything heard previously, a sound of pain rather than rage. It tried to curl inward to protect itself, but Daniel was already rolling away, coming up on his feet behind the creature. "Class 5 Deathworlder strength," he explained to no one in particular, flexing his fingers. "Also opposable thumbs. Really underrated adaptation." The Razor Claw turned to face him again, but its movements were now more hesitant. One of its limbs dragged slightly, apparently damaged by Daniel's strike. "Look," Daniel addressed the creature directly, as if it might understand. "This isn't going well for either of us. You're hurt, I'm getting tired, and neither of us signed up for an actual fight to the death. So how about we call it a draw?" The Razor Claw's response was another charge, though noticeably slower than before. Daniel sighed. "Yeah, didn't think that would work." He glanced around the room, clearly looking for something. His eyes landed on the professor's abandoned console. "Hey, Professor, does that thing control the classroom lighting?" Yes, Professor Lyrics called back. "The spectral range adjusts to accommodate different species visual." "Great. When I say now, crank the UV to maximum." Daniel began backing toward the console, drawing the Razor Claw away from the remaining students. "But the controls are on this side," the professor protested. "Just get ready to hit whatever button makes it happen," Daniel called back, just as the Razor Claw lunged once more. This time, instead of evading, Daniel grabbed 2 of the creature's forelimbs. For a suspended moment, they were locked together, the human's muscles straining against the alien predator's natural weapons. Then, with a sudden twist that utilized the creature's own momentum, Daniel spun the Razor Claw around and sent it crashing into the console. "Now!" he shouted. Professor Lyric scrambled from his hiding place and slapped a sequence of controls on his backup remote. Instantly, the amphitheater was bathed in light that, to most species present, appeared only as a slight bluish tinge. To the Razor Claw, however, the effect was dramatic. The creature immediately ceased its attack, its body language shifting from aggressive to defensive. It curled its limbs inward and began backing away, seeking shelter from the perceived radiation storm. "That's it," Daniel said, his voice deliberately calm now. "Just like a thunderstorm back home, right? Time to find a nice cave and wait it out." He began slowly herding the creature toward its original containment platform, where the field projectors, though damaged, were still partially functional. The Razor Claw, now fully in retreat mode, offered minimal resistance. By the time university security burst into the room, Daniel had managed to guide the predator back onto the platform, and Professor Lyrics had established a weakened but functional containment field. "Situation's under control," Daniel informed the security team, who stood frozen in the doorway, their weapon arrays powered up but untargeted as they tried to process the scene before them. "Though you might want to check your emergency response time. Not super impressive, guys." Word of the incident spread through the university faster than a quantum entanglement cascade. By evening, the campus infonet was saturated with eyewitness accounts, most of them growing more exaggerated with each retelling. In one version, Daniel had allegedly ripped one of the Razor Claw's limbs off and beaten it into submission with it. In another, he had communicated with the creature telepathically, convincing it to return to its containment voluntarily. The truth, while less fantastical, was impressive enough on its own, a fact that became apparent during the official review meeting called by university administration the following day. "Completely irresponsible," Chancellor Vox was saying, her crystalline form glittering with agitation as she addressed Professor Lyrics. "Bringing a Class 3 predator into a standard classroom? With inadequate security measures? You're fortunate no one was killed. They sat around a circular table in the administrative tower's conference room. Chancellor Vox, Professor Lyrics, the head of university security, a representative from the ethics committee, and, somewhat uncomfortably, Daniel himself. With all due respect, Chancellor, Professor Lyrics replied, his mandibles clicking nervously. The containment field was rated well above the standard requirements for a specimen of that classification. The equipment failure was unprecedented and is still being investigated. That's hardly the point. The Chancellor's voice took on a higher resonance, indicating extreme displeasure in her species. The fact remains that you placed students in danger and nearly caused an interspecies incident. Do you have any idea what would happen if word got out that we nearly got a human killed during a routine class demonstration? Actually, Daniel interjected, raising a hand like he was still in class. I'm fine. Really. Got a couple of scratches, but nothing serious. Human skin, tougher than it looks. All eyes turned to him, expressions ranging from disbelief to curiosity. That is precisely the issue, Mr. Daniel, Chancellor Vox said, her tone softening slightly. Your species' diplomatic relationship with the Galactic Federation is still in its infancy. An incident like this could have set back interspecies relations considerably. Or advanced them, the Ethics Committee representative suggested, speaking up for the first time. A Morigi with feather-like sensory appendages that constantly shifted colors, she had been observing the discussion with obvious fascination. This incident has provided unprecedented data on human capabilities under stress. Information that might normally take decades of careful cultural exchange to obtain. Dr. Frill, the Chancellor warned, this is hardly the time to pursue your research interests. On the contrary, Dr. Frill replied, her feathers shifting to an inquisitive blue. This may be exactly the time. Mr. Daniel's actions yesterday challenged several established xenobiological paradigms. She turned to address Daniel directly. Your physical capabilities appear to exceed projected parameters for even Class 5 Deathworlders. How do you explain this discrepancy? Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, which had been designed for a physiology considerably different from his own. I don't know about any parameters or whatever, but I wrestled in high school and do rock climbing on weekends. Plus, you know, adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Fascinating. Dr. Frill's feathers rippled. A chemical response enhancer activated by threat stimuli. We've observed similar mechanisms in other species, but rarely with such dramatic results. Look, Daniel said, leaning forward. I appreciate the scientific interest and all, but I really don't think what happened was that special. Humans have been dealing with predators since, well, forever. It's kind of our thing. Your thing, Professor Lyrics repeated, his academic interest visibly overcoming his earlier nervousness. Is neutralizing apex predators with your bare manipulator appendages? Well, no, usually we'd use tools, Daniel admitted. A spear would have been nice, or, you know, a really big gun, but you work with what you've got. This is precisely the kind of casual attitude toward violence that concerns many Federation species about humans, the Chancellor noted, her crystalline form vibrating with concern. Violence? Daniel looked genuinely confused. I didn't kill it. I could have maybe, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was making sure nobody got hurt, including the Razor Claw if possible. A moment of silence followed this statement as the assembled aliens processed it. You were protecting the Predator? The security chief asked, his mechanical translator struggling to convey his bewilderment. Well, yeah. It's not like it was evil or anything. It was just doing what comes naturally. Not its fault it got put in a faulty containment field in the middle of a classroom. Daniel shrugged. Besides, it's probably pretty rare, right? Endangered, maybe? That would be a shame. Professor Lyrics's mandibles clicked rapidly, his species equivalent of clearing his throat. The Niski razor claw is indeed a protected species. There are fewer than 500 known specimens in existence. Right, so killing it would have been a waste, Daniel concluded. Not to mention it was clearly intelligent enough to problem-solve its way out of your containment. That deserves some respect. Dr. Frill's feathers had shifted to a deep purple of intellectual excitement. This perspective is remarkable. A predator species showing concern for the welfare of another predator, even when under direct threat. This suggests a complex ethical framework that we hadn't previously attributed to Deathworlders. Oh, come on, Daniel sighed. You're making it sound like humans are some kind of incomprehensible alien monster. He paused, then chuckled. I mean, I guess technically we are aliens to you, but still, we're just people. Most of us don't go around wrestling alien predators for fun. Most? The Chancellor inquired, alarmed. A figure of speech, Daniel clarified quickly. Look, can we wrap this up? I've got a comparative literature exam tomorrow, and I still need to finish reading The Crystalline Harmonies of Vegan Dusk, which, by the way, loses a lot in translation. The Chancellor's form flickered briefly, her species equivalent of a sigh. Very well. The official investigation will continue, but for now, we see no reason to take any action regarding your involvement, Mr. Daniel. You acted to protect yourself and others, and your intervention likely prevented more serious injuries or fatalities. Cool, so we're good here? Not entirely, the Chancellor continued. This incident has raised significant questions about security protocols, xenobiological research methodologies, and most relevantly to you, our understanding of human capabilities and behavior. Meaning? Daniel prompted. Dr. Frill's feathers rippled eagerly. Meaning, Mr. Daniel, that we would very much like to conduct a more thorough study of human stress responses and physical capabilities. Purely voluntary, of course, and under much more controlled conditions. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You want me to be a lab rat? A research participant, Dr. Frill corrected, with full academic credit and compensation. And fewer escaped predators, one would hope, Professor Lyrics added. Daniel considered this for a moment. Would it help other humans attending the university in the future? Make things easier for them? Undoubtedly, Dr. Frill confirmed. Current accommodations for humans are based largely on theoretical models rather than empirical data. Your participation could significantly improve conditions for future human students. And, the Chancellor added with what might have been a touch of calculated persuasion, it would certainly reflect positively on your species' commitment to interstellar cooperation. Daniel laughed. Okay, I see how it is. Appeal to my altruism and my species' pride in one go. He shook his head. Fine, I'm in. But I draw the line at anything involving those little shock fields again. Those hurt. Excellent. Dr. Frill's feathers flashed a bright, happy yellow. We can begin as soon as your academic schedule permits. I have so many questions about your endocrine system, musculature density, reaction times. Maybe we table the specifics for now, the Chancellor suggested, noting Daniel's increasingly wary expression. This meeting is adjourned. Professor Lyrics, you will remain to discuss the future of your classroom demonstrations. As they filed out of the conference room, Dr. Frill fell into step beside Daniel, or as close to it as her floating locomotion allowed. I've been studying xenobiology for 73 cycles, she said conversationally, and I've never observed anything quite like your encounter with the razor claw. The speed of your risk assessment, the precision of your movements, the apparent casual nature of your problem-solving under extreme stress. It's unprecedented. Daniel shrugged, a gesture Dr. Frill made note of for future reference. Like I said, just did what needed doing. Any human would have done the same. Would they? Dr. Frill's feathers rippled with interest. Are all humans capable of what you demonstrated yesterday? Well, no, not exactly the same thing. Some would have done better, some worse. But the basic approach? Yeah, that's pretty standard human thinking. Fascinating. And what is standard human thinking in a crisis situation? Daniel considered this as they walked down the gently sloping corridor, passing members of a dozen different species who, unaware of his recent notoriety, paid him little attention. I guess, assess the situation, identify the biggest threat, figure out how to neutralize it with minimum collateral damage, then act decisively? He shrugged again. Basic stuff. We teach it to kids. Dr. Frill's feathers went completely still, a sign of astonishment in her species. You teach combat tactics to your young? What? No, not combat tactics. Just problem-solving. Critical thinking. How to keep a cool head in an emergency. Daniel paused, then added with a grin. Though I guess my high school wrestling coach would be pretty smug about how useful those takedowns turned out to be against an alien death monster. They had reached an intersection where their paths would diverge. Daniel toward the humanities complex, Dr. Frill toward the science facilities. One last question, if I may, Dr. Frill said, her feathers now a contemplative green. During the incident, several observers noted that you appeared to be talking to the razor claw, explaining your actions, even making jokes. Why? Daniel blinked, genuinely surprised by the question. Oh, that. Just thinking out loud, I guess. Helps me focus. Plus, you know, humor helps with stress. Keeps you from freezing up. You were making jokes? To manage your own fear response? Sure, that. And years of watching action movies where the hero always has a snappy one-liner. Daniel smiled. Cultural conditioning, right? Isn't that what you xenosociologists are always going on about? Dr. Frill's feathers shimmered with amusement. Indeed, a most enlightening perspective. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I look forward to our future research sessions. As she floated away, Daniel heard her muttering into a personal recording device. Note: human use of humor as a stress management tool during life-threatening situations requires further study. Possible implications for battlefield psychology. Daniel shook his head and continued toward his literature class, wondering if his professor would accept I was busy wrestling an alien predator as an excuse for not finishing his reading assignment. 2 weeks later, the Galactic University Infonet highlighted an unprecedented event, the introduction of a new course titled Human Studies, Deathworld Adaptations and Cultural Perspectives. It was the first curriculum in the university's 3,000-cycle history to focus exclusively on a single species. The course was already oversubscribed, with a waiting list that included students from every faculty. Rumor had it that several diplomatic corps officers had also requested observer status. Professor Lyrics, somewhat surprisingly, had been retained as co-instructor alongside Dr. Frill. His experience with the Razor Claw incident, while initially seen as a catastrophic failure of safety protocols, had been reframed as a valuable practical learning opportunity in the official university records. And Daniel? He had declined the offered position as teaching assistant, citing his need to focus on his literature degree. However, he had agreed to give occasional guest lectures, the first of which was titled Apex Predators and Poetry, The Human Contradiction. His first reading assignment for the class was a very old human text called The Most Dangerous Game, followed by an even older poem called The Tiger. As he explained to Dr. Frill, who had questioned the relevance of these archaic works, if you want to understand humans, you need to understand how we've always seen ourselves, caught between being the hunter and the hunted, the predator and the prey, the monster and the hero. We've been wrestling with that contradiction since before we invented writing. Dr. Frill's feathers had shifted to a thoughtful blue. And have you resolved this contradiction? Daniel had laughed. Resolved it? No, we've embraced it. That's what makes us human. The evening before his first guest lecture, Daniel stood in his specially modified dormitory room, practicing his presentation. On his desk sat a small trophy the university had commissioned, a miniature sculpture depicting a human and a razor claw, frozen in the moment before their confrontation. The plaque read simply, "In recognition of courage, compassion, and cross-species understanding." Daniel picked it up, turning it over in his hands with an amused smile. From his homeworld came a message alert. His parents, eager to hear about his alien adventure that had somehow made it into Earth's news feeds despite being heavily redacted by the human diplomatic corps. As he prepared to answer their call, he glanced at the notes for his lecture, particularly the conclusion he had written. The greatest predator adaptation isn't claws or teeth or venom or speed. It's the ability to understand other predators, to think like them, to anticipate them, and ultimately, to decide when not to be a predator at all. That's not just a human trait. It's the trait of any truly intelligent species. And if we're going to make this whole galactic civilization thing work, it's the skill we all need to master together. Daniel set his notes aside and answered the call from Earth, grinning as his parents' faces appeared on the holographic display. So, his father began without preamble, "We hear you've been wrestling alien monsters between literature classes?" "Dad, it's been blown way out of proportion," Daniel said, though he couldn't keep the pride out of his voice. It was just one alien monster, and it was more like evasive maneuvering than wrestling. His mother's worried face filled most of the screen as she leaned closer. "The diplomatic brief said you were injured. They mentioned minor lacerations but wouldn't give us details." "Mom, seriously, it's nothing." Daniel rolled up his sleeve to reveal a thin, already healing scratch along his forearm. "See? The university medical team patched me up in like 5 minutes. Their region tech is amazing. This would have needed stitches back home." His father's expression was a complex mixture of concern and unmistakable paternal pride. "They're saying you saved your professor and half a dozen other students." "Yeah, well, the news always exaggerates." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "I just kept the thing distracted until security showed up. No big deal." "No big deal?" His mother's voice rose slightly. "Daniel James Weston, you could have been killed." "Not really," Daniel replied with genuine nonchalance. "The razor claw was dangerous, sure, but it evolved on a world with like 60% of Earth's gravity. I had a major advantage the whole time." "A razor? What?" his father asked. "Razor claw. Big predator with scythe-like limbs. Looks way scarier than it is, honestly." His parents exchanged a look that Daniel recognized all too well. The "our son is either crazy or lying" look they'd perfected during his teenage years. "Look," he continued, "the whole thing lasted maybe 3 minutes. The university has apologized like 1,000 times. They've completely overhauled their safety protocols, and now I'm apparently the poster child for human-alien relations." He gestured to the trophy on his desk. "They even gave me this weird little statue." His mother squinted at the image. Is that what the creature looked like? It looks horrifying. It's a miniature, Mom. The real one was the size of Dad's pickup truck. There was a moment of stunned silence from both parents. You fought something the size of a truck? His father finally managed. I didn't fight it, I evaded it, Daniel corrected. Big difference. And anyway, it's led to some really interesting opportunities. I've been asked to help develop a whole new course on humans and Earth culture. The xenobiologists here are suddenly super interested in us. Is that safe? His mother asked immediately. Daniel laughed. Yes, Mom. It's basically just interviews and some physical tests. Standard stuff. They're fascinated by how humans handle stress. Apparently, most species either freeze up or go berserk when threatened, but our ability to stay calm and think strategically is pretty rare. Well, you always were good under pressure, his father acknowledged. Remember that state championship match your senior year? Down 5 points with 30 seconds left? This was a little different, Dad, Daniel said with a grin. But yeah, same principle, I guess. We're proud of you, his mother said, her initial worry giving way to acceptance. Just try not to become some kind of interstellar gladiator, okay? You're there to study literature. Trust me, I have no plans to make alien monster wrestling my career. The literature degree is still the priority. Daniel glanced at the time display. I should probably go. I'm giving a guest lecture tomorrow and I need to review my notes. A lecture? On what? His father asked. Human perspectives on predator-prey relationships in literature, Daniel replied. I'm comparing Hemingway to some Zentari hunting poetry. It's actually pretty interesting how similar the themes are, despite evolving on planets 15 light-years apart. His mother shook her head with a bemused smile. Only you could nearly get eaten by an alien and turn it into a comparative literature project. What can I say? I'm making the most of my education. Daniel grinned. I'll call again next week. Love you both. After ending the call, Daniel returned to his notes, making a few final adjustments to his presentation. The trophy caught his eye again, and he smiled at the absurdity of it all. 3 months ago, he'd been just another human exchange student, struggling with alien syntax and bizarre cultural references. Now he was something of a campus celebrity. The Death Worlder who dances with predators, according to one particularly dramatic Infonet headline. A notification chimed on his university comm device. It was from Dr. Frill. Final attendance count for tomorrow's lecture, 342 students from 28 species. University providing additional security as precaution. No predators this time, promise. Sleep well, Daniel. He sent back a quick acknowledgement, then stared out his window at the unfamiliar constellations of this world so far from Earth. The moons were rising, 3 of them, casting multiple shadows across the university's bioarchitectural spires. For a moment, he felt the familiar pang of homesickness that occasionally struck him. Earth, with its crushing gravity, volatile weather, and dangerous wildlife, conditions that most galactic citizens found nightmarish, was still home. Still the world that had shaped his species, forged them in evolutionary fire until they were tough enough, clever enough, and adaptable enough to reach the stars. But as he looked down at the campus below, where beings from hundreds of worlds mingled and learned together, he felt something else too. Pride. Not just in himself or his species, but in this grand, improbable experiment called galactic civilization. Different bodies, different minds, different evolutionary paths, all trying to understand each other, to find common ground despite their differences. Tomorrow he would try to help them understand humans a little better, and in doing so, maybe understand themselves better too. Daniel closed his notes and prepared for bed, setting his alarm for early morning. As he drifted towards sleep, his mind replayed fragments of the Razor Claw encounter, but this time without adrenaline clouding his perception. He remembered the creature's movements, powerful, precise, the product of millions of years of evolution. In its own way, it had been beautiful. The most dangerous predator, he murmured to himself, echoing the conclusion of his lecture notes, is the one who can choose not to be a predator at all. In the morning, he would share this insight with hundreds of alien students. For now, though, the human Death Worlder slept peacefully, far from the world that had made him what he was, but carrying that world with him always, in his DNA, in his reflexes, and in his uniquely human perspective on the universe. The lecture hall fell silent as Daniel concluded his presentation. For a moment, no one moved or spoke, a rare occurrence in a room containing so many different species with such varied communication methods. Then from the back of the hall, a sound began. It started as a soft clicking from the insectoid students, joined by the gentle humming of the gaseous vril, the resonant tones of the crystalline Furians, and finally, the unmistakable sound of hands clapping from the few other humans in attendance. It was applause, translated across species boundaries into a universal expression of appreciation. Daniel stood at the podium, momentarily overwhelmed. When he'd agreed to give this lecture, he'd expected polite interest at best, academic skepticism at worst. He hadn't expected connection. As the sounds faded, Dr. Frill floated to the stage, her feathers a brilliant gold of excitement. "Thank you, Daniel, for that most illuminating perspective," she said, her translator rendering her vibrations into speech. "We have time for a few questions from the audience." Appendages, tentacles, and hands rose throughout the hall. Dr. Frill indicated a Morigi student near the front. "You mentioned that humans deliberately seek out dangerous activities for fun. Activities like climbing mountains or diving into oceans. Is this behavior common among all humans, or only certain specialized individuals?" Daniel smiled. "It varies. Some humans are definitely more thrill-seeking than others. But most of us engage in some form of controlled risk-taking, whether it's physical challenges, creative endeavors, or just trying new foods. It's how we grow." Another student, a methane breather enclosed in a protective suit, was recognized next. "In your analysis of human literature, you highlighted the recurring theme of conquering fear, rather than eliminating threats. This seems counterproductive from an evolutionary standpoint. Why not simply eliminate all predators from your world?" "We've tried that in some places," Daniel admitted. "It usually backfires spectacularly. Ecosystems are complex, and apex predators play crucial roles. Besides, we've learned that the real threat isn't usually the predator itself. It's our fear of it. Conquering that fear, learning to coexist, that's the more sustainable approach." Questions continued for another 30 minutes, ranging from technical inquiries about human physiology to philosophical discussions about Earth's predator-prey dynamics. Throughout it all, Daniel noticed something changing in the room. A subtle shift in how the alien students were looking at him. When he'd first arrived at the university 6 months ago, he'd grown accustomed to certain reactions: wary distance, clinical curiosity, or worst of all, the painfully obvious attempts not to appear frightened of the Death Worlder. Now, there was something new in their postures and expressions. Something that, across all the physiological differences, he recognized as respect. Not fear, not fascination, but genuine respect. Predator to predator, intelligence to intelligence. As the session concluded and students began filing out, many paused to extend appendages in various species-specific gestures of appreciation. A few even requested to take holographic images with him, which Daniel obliged with some embarrassment. Professor Lyrics approached as the hall emptied, his mandibles arranged in what Daniel had learned to recognize as a genuine smile. "I believe," the professor said, "that was the most successful xenobiological lecture in university history. The engagement metrics were off the charts." "Thanks," Daniel replied. "It wasn't too, Earth-centric?" "On the contrary," Professor Lyrics assured him, "your comparative approach was most effective. The parallels you drew between Earth predators and those from other worlds helped contextualize human development in a way our students could relate to." Dr. Frill joined them, her feathers still shimmering with excitement. "The Chancellor is already receiving messages from faculty across multiple departments. There are requests for similar lectures on human approaches to everything from conflict resolution to artistic expression." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Really? I was just talking about how we deal with scary animals." "You were talking about perspective," Dr. Frill corrected. "About seeing the universe through human eyes. That has value far beyond xenobiology." As they walked together toward the faculty lounge, Daniel noticed something else new. The way other beings in the corridors moved aside for them. Not with the nervous deference he'd sometimes encountered before, but with a different kind of acknowledgement, the kind given to someone who had earned their place. "So," Professor Lyrics said as they walked, "I understand you've been invited to join the Interspecies Athletic Exhibition next month. Will you participate?" Daniel groaned. "Word travels fast around here. I haven't decided yet." "You should consider it," Dr. Frill encouraged. "It would be an excellent opportunity to demonstrate human physical capabilities in a controlled, positive context. As opposed to a terrifying life-or-death struggle with an escaped predator," Daniel suggested dryly. "Precisely," Professor Lyrics agreed, missing the sarcasm entirely. "Much more scientifically valid." Daniel shook his head with a smile. "I'll think about it, but no promises." As they reached the faculty lounge, a message alert chimed on Daniel's comm device. It was from the Human Diplomatic Corps. "Mr. Weston, your recent activities have come to our attention. Your handling of the incident with the Niski Razor Claw and subsequent cultural outreach efforts represent human interests admirably. The Corps would like to discuss potential opportunities following your graduation. Please contact us at your convenience." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. This was unexpected. The diplomatic corps was notoriously selective, typically recruiting only from Earth's most prestigious universities. For them to reach out to an undergraduate literature major studying abroad, it was unprecedented. Good news? Dr. Frill inquired, her feathers shifting to a curious purple. I'm not sure yet, Daniel replied honestly, pocketing the device. Possibly. As they entered the lounge, conversation briefly paused as various faculty members noticed their arrival. Then someone raised a drinking appendage in Daniel's direction, a universal gesture of acknowledgement. To the human who showed us that understanding predators is more valuable than fearing them, called out a Zentari professor of astroethics, and who reminded us that the most important adaptations aren't physical at all. Others joined in the toast, raising containers of various substances that would have been toxic, intoxicating, or simply indigestible across species lines. Daniel, feeling his face flush with the human response of embarrassment, raised his own water bottle in return. To galactic civilization, he countered, where a literature student can somehow end up teaching xenobiology, and everyone's willing to learn from everyone else, regardless of what planet they call home. As the gathering continued around him, Daniel found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. Not just to this alien university light years from Earth, but to this particular moment of cross-species connection. He thought about the razor claw, now safely housed in a proper research facility where it was being studied with appropriate precautions. He thought about the lecture he'd just given, and how surprisingly receptive the audience had been. He thought about the message from the diplomatic corps, and the unexpected doors that were opening before him. Most of all, he thought about perspective, how his had changed, and how he might have changed others. In the ancient literature of Earth, humans had always imagined themselves at the center of the cosmic story, the heroes, the conquerors, the ones who mattered most. Now, standing in a room full of beings from dozens of worlds, each with their own evolutionary path and their own perspective on the universe, Daniel understood the truth. No one species was the center of the story. The story itself, the grand, improbable convergence of different worlds and different minds, that was what mattered. And if being from a death world gave humans a unique role to play in that story, well, that was something to be proud of, not apologize for. Daniel smiled as a Firian professor approached him with questions about Earth literature. Around them, the faculty lounge hummed with the sounds of a dozen different species engaged in the shared pursuit of knowledge. Predator and prey, Deathworlder and Garden-worlder, all finding common ground in curiosity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was working. And for a human far from home on a world full of aliens, that was more than enough.
End!